On the afternoon of the 23rd of September in the year 1822, at Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, Sultan Mahmud II walked through the richly adorned corridors of his imperial harem, that labyrinthine complex which housed approximately 1,200 women. Among them were official wives, favorite concubines, concubine candidates, domestic slaves, guardian eunuchs, and an entire elaborate hierarchy of feminine power that functioned as a state within the state. Mahmud, recognized for his modernizing reforms of the Ottoman Empire, perpetuated the millennial tradition of imperial harems that dated back to predecessors who possessed even greater numbers of women. But among all rulers throughout history, from Egyptian pharaohs to Chinese emperors, from Arab caliphs to European kings, some distinguished themselves not merely by the size of their harems, but by an obsession that bordered on pathology, by excesses that shocked even societies accustomed to elite polygamy, and by the devastating political consequences of uncontrollable appetites. These were not simply polygamous kings within the norms of their cultures, but men whose sexual compulsion dominated their lives to the point of neglecting governance, exhausting national treasuries, provoking rebellions, and in some cases leading to the collapse of entire dynasties. This is the story of history's most sex-obsessed kings and the most scandalous harems of royalty, an examination of how absolute power combined with the absence of sexual restrictions produced excesses ranging from the absurd to the tragic, and an analysis of how these harems functioned as complex political institutions, where women, though confined, frequently exercised considerable power through the manipulation of obsessed rulers. To understand royal harems, we must first grasp that they were not simply places of sexual gratification, though they certainly served that function. They were sophisticated political institutions, economic systems, and sites of education and culture. The word harem derives from the Arabic haram, meaning sacred or forbidden, designating the space where family women lived, segregated from external men. In Islamic societies, from Morocco to Indonesia, gender segregation was the norm for upper classes. But imperial harems represented a distinct phenomenon in scale and complexity. The Ottoman harem at Topkapi, for instance, occupied more than 400 rooms across multiple courtyards and floors. It possessed its own administrative hierarchy, headed by the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who was frequently the most powerful woman in the empire. Below her was the Haseki Sultan, the principal favorite consort, followed by other official wives, then concubines of various categories, and finally domestic slaves. Eunuchs, men castrated before puberty, served as guards and administrators, the only men besides the Sultan permitted entry. This system, though oppressive by modern standards, offered some women paths to power that did not exist outside the harem. An intelligent and ambitious woman who gained the Sultan's favor could accumulate wealth, influence politics through him, and secure powerful positions for her sons. The first king we shall examine is Farouk I of Egypt, a 20th century ruler whose sexual excesses were so notorious they contributed to the fall of the Egyptian monarchy. Farouk was born in the year 1920, son of King Fuad I. He ascended to the throne in the year 1936, at merely 16 years of age following his father's death. Initially, Farouk was popular, perceived as a handsome and charismatic young king who could modernize Egypt. He married Farida Zulfikar in the year 1938, a marriage that produced 3 daughters. But as the years passed, Farouk's behavior became progressively scandalous. He began openly collecting mistresses, maintaining multiple residences throughout Cairo and Alexandria where he kept women. According to biographies, particularly William Stadium's work titled Too Rich, the High Life and Tragic Death of King Farouk, he developed an insatiable appetite that drove him to constantly seek new conquests. Farouk frequented Cairo's nightclubs, where he would identify attractive women and instruct his advisors to arrange encounters. Refusal was rarely an option when the invitation came from the king. He maintained secret apartments throughout the city where he conducted his affairs. His wife Farida, publicly humiliated by his flagrant infidelities, divorced him in the year 1948. In the year 1951, Farouk married Nariman Sadek, a 16-year-old girl while he was 31. This marriage was equally unhappy, with Farouk continuing multiple affairs. But beyond affairs with elite women, Farouk also had relationships with actresses, dancers, and prostitutes. He spent enormous sums maintaining his mistresses in luxury. It is estimated that around the year 1950, Farouk was spending approximately 30% of his personal royal budget on gifts for women and maintaining apartments for them. Simultaneously, Egypt faced an economic crisis with an impoverished population. The contrast between Farouk's excesses and the poverty of ordinary Egyptians fueled resentment that contributed to the revolution of the year 1952. In July of that year, the Free Officers movement led by Gamal Abdel Nasser overthrew the monarchy. Farouk was forced to abdicate and go into exile. He spent his remaining years in Italy and France, continuing a life of excess until dying of a heart attack in the year 1965, obese and financially ruined. For Farouk, sexual obsession not only ruined his personal life, but directly contributed to the loss of his throne and the end of a dynasty that had ruled Egypt since the year 1805. The second king is Ismail the Bloodthirsty of Morocco, Sultan of the Saadian dynasty, who ruled from the year 1572 to the year 1574. Ismail is remembered for his extreme cruelty and for his harem that supposedly contained 500 women, a considerable number even by Islamic harem standards. Contemporary European sources, particularly accounts from Christian captives held in Morocco, describe Ismail as a man of violent appetites who tolerated no refusal. He maintained his harem in Meknes, his capital, in a sumptuous palace. According to testimonies, he personally selected women from all regions of the empire, including Berbers from the Atlas, Arabs from the plains, and black slaves captured in sub-Saharan raids. Women who displeased Ismail or whom he suspected of infidelity were summarily executed. An account by Dominique Busneau, a French priest who visited Morocco in the late 17th century, mentions that Ismail ordered the execution of a concubine who refused his advances, having her strangled before the other harem women as a warning. The number of children attributed to Ismail varies wildly across sources. Some claims suggest he fathered more than 800 children, a number that would be biologically impossible for a man during a 55-year reign. More conservative figures suggest perhaps 100 to 200 legitimate children, still an extraordinary quantity. Ismail used his harem not only for gratification, but as a political tool, marrying his daughters to allies and placing his sons in administrative positions, thus creating a kinship network that consolidated his power. But his cruelty and excesses also generated instability. After his death in the year 1727, Morocco entered a period of civil war among his numerous sons competing for succession. The eighth and final king we shall examine is Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire, who ruled from the year 1520 until the year 1566. Suleiman is generally regarded as one of the greatest Ottoman sultans, having expanded the empire through military conquests and presided over a cultural golden age. But his personal life was marked by a controversial obsession with Hürrem Sultan, known in the West as Roxolana. Hürrem was a slave of Ukrainian origin brought to the imperial harem. She captured Suleiman's attention and, through her intelligence and beauty, became the dominant influence in his life. What made the relationship scandalous was not the existence of a favorite concubine, which was normal, but that Suleiman broke precedent by formally marrying Hürrem, the first time an Ottoman sultan had married a concubine in centuries. He was also monogamous with her, taking no other wives or principal concubines, highly unusual behavior for a sultan. Hürrem used her influence to manipulate succession politics. She convinced Suleiman that his eldest son Mustafa from a previous marriage was plotting treason. Suleiman ordered Mustafa's execution in the year 1553, a decision that shocked the empire and was probably unjust. This left Hürrem's sons as heirs, eventually bringing Selim II to the throne. Hürrem was also involved in international intrigues, corresponding with European kings and influencing Ottoman foreign policy. When she died in the year 1558, Suleiman was devastated. He remained faithful to her memory for the remaining 8 years of his life. Though Suleiman remained a capable ruler, his obsession with Hürrem and his willingness to alter succession because of her had negative long-term consequences. Selim II, the son who ultimately inherited, was an incompetent ruler whose reign initiated the gradual decline of Ottoman power. Analyzing these 8 cases across centuries and different cultures, common patterns emerge. First, sexual obsession was rarely simply about physical gratification, but intertwined with the exercise of power. For absolute rulers, the ability to possess multiple women, to take any desired woman, to spend national wealth on sexual whims, constituted the supreme demonstration of unrestricted power. Second, women in harems, though confined and objectified, frequently exercised considerable power. Hürrem's sultan effectively governed the Ottoman Empire through Suleiman. Madame de Maintenon influenced the religious policy of Louis XIV. Young Guiffet elevated her entire family to positions of power. These women understood that in patriarchal societies where they had no formal power, influence over powerful men constituted an alternative route to power. Third, rulers' sexual excesses rarely remained a private matter, but had political consequences. Extravagant spending exhausted treasuries. Favoritism based on sexual relationships led to the promotion of incompetence. Neglect of duties while pursuing pleasures created power vacuums that others exploited. And scandal from royal behavior frequently fueled popular discontent that contributed to rebellions and revolutions. Fourth, attempts to control succession through harem manipulation frequently backfired. Muley Ismail produced so many heirs that he created civil war. Ibrahim I was deposed partly due to his harem excesses. Suleiman executed his best heir under a concubine's influence, thus weakening his dynasty. Modern historians debate how to interpret harems and rulers' sexual obsessions. Some, particularly feminists, view harems as institutions of extreme patriarchal oppression, where women were reduced to sexual and reproductive objects without agency. Leslie Pierce in The Imperial Harem argues against this simplistic view, demonstrating that women in the Ottoman harem possessed considerable agency, property, and political power. They competed fiercely, but within a system that offered real opportunities for upward mobility. Other historians like Fatima Mernissi in her works on Islamic harems emphasize the ambiguity. Women were simultaneously oppressed by confinement, but empowered by their access to rulers. As for the kings themselves, the question is whether they were simply men with normal appetites, but extraordinary opportunities, or whether some exhibited something close to pathological compulsion. Farouk of Egypt seems to have had genuine hypersexuality that he could not control, even when he recognized it was destroying his reign. Ibrahim the Mad probably had genuine mental health problems exacerbated by childhood trauma. Others, like Muley Ismail, seem to have viewed prolific reproduction as dynastic duty, taken to logical extreme. We must also recognize that much of what we know about harems comes from problematic sources. European accounts of Islamic harems were frequently Orientalist fantasies that exoticized and sexualized Middle Eastern cultures. Paintings of harems by 19th century European artists depict semi-nude women in erotic poses, revealing more about the artist's fantasies than historical reality. Internal sources, when available, show a more complex image. Memoirs of Ottoman harem women who wrote about their experiences, such as Layla Saz in the 19th century, describe a life structured by rigid etiquette, education, and administrative hierarchy as much as by sexuality. Similarly, Chinese sources on imperial harems emphasize the ritual, precedent, and bureaucracy that governed sexual interactions. The emperor did not simply choose women at will, but followed elaborate protocols about whom he visited and when. The decline of royal harems corresponds to modernization and the decline of absolute monarchies. In the Islamic world, reformers of the 19th and 20th centuries argued that harems were symbols of backwardness that impeded progress. Turkey abolished the imperial harem when it abolished the sultanate in the year 1922. Morocco maintained royal polygamy, but on a reduced scale. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states maintained polygamy for the royal family, but not on the scale of historical harems. In Europe, though monarchies survived, expectations changed. Modern kings were expected to be monogamous, or at least discreet about affairs. Sexual scandal became a threat to the throne rather than a demonstration of power. This shift reflects broader democratic and egalitarian values, where rulers are no longer seen as having different rights from ordinary citizens. Today, when we look back at these sex-obsessed kings and their scandalous harems, we see institutions that were simultaneously fascinating and deeply problematic. They reveal much about the societies that produced them, about gender hierarchies, about the nature of absolute power, about the intersection of sexuality and politics. They also remind us that rulers with unrestricted power frequently use that power in ways that serve personal appetites rather than the public good. Farouk's excesses contributed to the revolution that overthrew the Egyptian monarchy. Xuanzong's obsession with Yang Guifei nearly destroyed the Tang dynasty. Ibrahim the Mad's spending led to his deposition and execution. These are not merely entertaining stories of scandalous behavior, but case studies on the dangers of absolute power. Sex-obsessed kings and the scandalous harems they maintained were not aberrations, but logical expressions of political systems, where rulers had no accountability, where national wealth was the monarch's personal property, and where women were viewed as possessions to be collected. That such systems occasionally produce disastrous consequences should not surprise us.